movie fans and general audiences alike agree that one of the best action movies of all time is the 1988 Bruce Willis classic Die Hard. Some people even hold it to the title of the greatest action movie ever made. When you have that kind of a benchmark film and it's a huge success, it's natural that the studio would want to do a sequel. But this is also a time where franchises aren't solely dominating the box office, and with Die Hard, you have a movie that proudly showcases that its hero is not someone who regularly goes off on James Bond or Rambo-type adventures with dossiers or missions and ongoing conflicts. John McClane was kind of a blue-collar family man who happens to find himself in the worst situations, and while he doesn't have a particular set of skills, he's really good at his job. So for the sequel, Die Hard 2, there was a delicate balance to strike. The first movie has such a specificity to it that it actually created a subgenre, with imitator movies being described as Die Hard on a blank. Die Hard 2 is what solidified that subgenre, and it made sure to hit the key bullet points that helped to define the first movie. While entertaining in its own right, a lot of people felt Die Hard 2 might have taken the safe route by staying too close to the winning formula. It's forgivable, and you can get away with it once, but once a third movie becomes an option, what would be the best approach? When it came time to set the stage, Die Hard 3 wasn't even conceived as Die Hard 3. Screenwriter Jonathan Hensleigh, who started with writing credits for Walt Disney's A Far Off Place and the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles TV series, reminisced about a childhood incident where he had hit another kid with a rock, an incident that haunted him. He thought to himself, what if he had caused this kid major bodily injuries which sent his life into a downward spiral, and the kid decided to take revenge on him as an adult?
Fuck off in some way.
Right. This is where the slow-burning vengeance in Die Hard with a Vengeance originates. He took his concept and wrote it into an original screenplay called Simon Says, which has no relation to the Dennis Rodman Dane Cook movie Simon Says.
You got moves? You got moves? I got moves, okay? Don't let me get all Jurassic on your ass, yeah? Oh, come on.
Simon Says would follow a cop in his mid-30s named Alex Bradshaw, who would be dragged into playing a game with a terrorist where he must beat the clock and solve his various riddles or else bombs would go off around the city. This mystery villain specifically targeted Alex due to his sins of the past. He would end up working with a partner, as a civilian bystander gets pulled along into the game as well. And with this having a buddy dynamic, Warner Brothers considered repurposing the script into a Lethal Weapon sequel. It's actually not hard to imagine Riggs and Murtaugh having to pay a toll for what Riggs may have done in his past. Eventually, the plan for this would not come into fruition, and 20th Century Fox would adapt the script into a second sequel in the Die Hard franchise, adding to the tradition in the making of this series as every movie, except the fifth, would be adapted from previous work that held no relation to this intellectual property. Die Hard being based off the novel Nothing Lasts Forever, Die Hard 2 based off the novel 58 Minutes, this movie with Simon Says, and the fourth would be based off a script titled WorldWar3.com. The director of the original Die Hard, John McTiernan, had passed on the opportunity to direct Die Hard 2, as he was involved in making The Hunt for Red October. He would be available at the time this script was acquired by 20th Century Fox, and with this unique concept, McTiernan was excited to revisit McClane's world and make something that captures the spirit of the first movie, but not try to remake the first movie. Interestingly, the details of this story leaves room for interpretation of the continuity with Die Hard 2 canon. There's no reference of John ever having moved to LA, no mention of his job there or his friendship with Al Powell, played by Reginald Vell Johnson. There was only an acknowledgement of the events from the first movie as it becomes a plot point, and additionally, there are only vague explanations as to what happened between him and his wife, Holly. As he summarizes,
"Well, she was in LA, I was in New York, had a fight on the phone, she hung up, I didn't call her back."
However, it could also easily be explained that enough time had passed that a series of unfortunate domestic troubles had cropped up, which led John to move back to New York. Nearly everything in the first hour is verbatim what Hensley had written for Simon Says, with the only changes made being character names and a few key lines to integrate it into the Die Hard universe. A big development for this one is setting it in New York City. McClane is no longer the fish out of water. We're right in his backyard, and we get to see him demonstrate his intimate knowledge of the city as he's playing Simon's game. Furthermore, in the past movies, John would usually shake up conversations by antagonizing people with his streetwise, biting New Yorker sarcasm.
Well, I got some bad news for you, Dwayne. From up here, it doesn't look like you're in charge of jack shit.
But in this, we're exposed to a bevy of that same kind of humor as he and his peers trade quips and insults on the regular.
Next 14 dump trucks stolen from a yard in Staten Island. Somebody starting a construction company?
Nah, it was John's landlady going to clean his apartment.
John is in his natural element, and we definitely see the influences that made him the kind of cop that he is. McTiernan felt McClane works best when he's an underdog, and he just wouldn't be the underdog if he wasn't already at a low point by the time the trouble starts. As mentioned earlier, he's separated from Holly, he's currently on suspension, and to top it all off, it's implied he's recently become a heavy drinker, and even went through the events of this movie with a day-long hangover. While traditionally John McClane works alone, he usually would have a minor ally. In the first film, he struck up a partnership with local policeman Al Powell, who became his unofficial liaison on the outside of Nakatomi. In the second film, Al provides some help from across the country, while a Dulles Airport staff member named Marvin assists John from the inside. In Die Hard with a Vengeance, this is the first time he's explicitly given a partner, an element that would continue in the following sequels. His partner in this is played by none other than Samuel L. Jackson. While they just barely shared a scene, Willis and Jackson would actually first work together on Pulp Fiction, and it was even Bruce's idea to bring Jackson on to play this role. Jackson plays a character immaculately named Zeus Carver. Zeus is an electrician with a shop in Harlem, which is where he first runs into John McClane. Simon's first game for McClane is to send him into Harlem wearing a sandwich board with an offensive message, and Zeus is someone already with a chip on his shoulder for trusting white people. He decides to confront McClane, and as the situation begins to escalate, McClane lets him in on the details of this act, which prompts Zeus to try to de-escalate it as best as he can. Unfortunately for him, this puts him in the playing field alongside McClane. Zeus is a fun-against type of role for Sam Jackson as, even though this is an action movie, he plays a character that's more mundane in nature, and can get quite panicky as opposed to the badass he's usually known for. He's a civilian caught up in an extraordinary situation, and when it comes time for him to take action, he's quite clumsy and makes near-fatal mistakes. He's far from useless, though. McClane, while street smart, definitely survives Simon's game thanks to the book smarts of Zeus and his ability to solve the riddles. While this could have easily been reimagined as a Lethal Weapon sequel, as the script lends itself to many scenes of our two leads arguing, McClane and Zeus give Riggs and Murtaugh a run for their money, as some of the best scenes showcase the amazing chemistry that Willis and Jackson have. This is prevalent during the riddle-solving scenes. John McTiernan, being an actor's director, has a knack for getting dialogue to flow very naturally, with little details being added to lines that are nice touches, as well as the exchanges between characters often overlapping, and they talk over each other like a Howard Hawks film.
Oh, you're sacked with 777?
Weren't you listening?
Yeah, I was listening to hear every
The fuck
fucking
is wrong with you?
Well, besides having a bad fucking hangover for one thing.
All right. 7 wives.
We were told you would be cooperative.
Cooperate with what?
Now, wait a minute. He
We're just
will
wasting
be.
time here in this
You
goddamn
want to
thing.
share information? How about...
It brings to mind when Bruce used to do that with Sybil Shepherd in Moonlighting.
All I'm saying is that the best parts of life are the parts you don't participate in. Look, of happenstance.
Nothing is
All
simple
bets
with
are
you.
off,
Chris
all
Dad
deals
is
are
more
null
like
and
it.
void.
And as
And
far
then,
as I
I
can't
know you've
believe I'm
been
listening
depressed.
to you.
This is normal.
Why
This
am
is
I not
absolutely
being
normal, and you've got a right
I
to
never
be
did
concerned. I know it.
It's been said that an action movie is only as good as your villain, and in this entry, we're treated to the charismatic, suave, mustache-twirling performance of Jeremy Irons. His Simon character is such a presence throughout the whole movie that you barely realize he doesn't actually make an on-screen appearance until around 46 minutes in. When it comes time for some much-needed exposition, spoilers for this decades-old movie, it's revealed that Simon is the brother of Hans Gruber, the villain of the first film, played by Alan Rickman. Hensley pitched to McTiernan this callback idea that he thought would give sufficient motivation for this act of revenge, plus he loved the idea of connecting the first movie with this one. McTiernan told Hensley to run with it. But for the both of them, they felt a straight-up revenge plot was a little too thin for the amount of trouble Simon was putting McClane and now Carver through. They began discussing the possibility of the revenge plot being a front for an even bigger plot, which became a heist. At one point, they had played around with the idea that Simon and his group would steal all the paintings from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, even to the point that Hensley started doing research visiting the Met. They eventually soured on the idea, and Hensley would find inspiration from reading up on gold that's held in the Federal Reserve Building in New York. He was able to write a fake heist around that so plausible that the FBI interrogated him on his acquirement of this information. Hensley simply told them he had read articles on the subject and was even treated to a tour of the facility.
Fuck off.
Once the heist is finally set in motion, Jeremy Irons absolutely steals the movie away from the two leads. As Simon speaks to McClane and the authorities during the first hour, Irons is able to command attention and play around with being simultaneously threatening and charming in the same vein Alan Rickman did. Simon speaks confidently and enjoys toying around with the cops, letting them know he's always 2 steps ahead. Once finally on screen, Irons plays Simon like a Bond villain who's not afraid to get his hands dirty and is having an absolute blast manipulating everybody. He's the puppet master you'd love to hate. Die Hard with a Vengeance premiered on May 19, 1995, with an opening day of over $22 million domestically. It would go on to make over $300 million worldwide, edging out Toy Story to be the highest-grossing movie of that year. With its subject matter of a mad bomber and several city explosions depicted, McTiernan faced a difficult decision to consider pushing the movie back or possibly re-editing some of it due to the horrific events of the Oklahoma City bombing happening just a month earlier. Ultimately, the studio decided to release the movie as planned with the existing cut. It received mixed reviews, with most of its critiques being questioning the plausibility of such an elaborate heist, groaning over an over-the-top sequence with McClane in the aqueducts, and the finale feeling a bit too tacked on, which even fans of the movie agree was its weakest aspect. This is because the ending was completely redone. The alternate original ending was a unique direction that became divisive for audiences. The movie has a relentless pace, and it kind of literally starts off with a bang, without traditional exposition, and it just keeps moving from there. In the alternate ending, the big finale slows everything down to just a conversation between John and Simon, and features little to no action. At face value, it's an incredible subversion where this high-octane action movie concludes with a simple scene of just 2 people talking. In this ending, that takes place months after that fateful day in New York, John had tracked Simon down to Hungary. He and Simon catch up, and it's revealed McClane had lost his job at the NYPD due to the FBI thinking he was in on the heist. McClane is now acting on his own, and makes Simon play a game of McClane Says, as he pulls out a rocket launcher with the directional arrows removed. McClane proceeds to give Simon a few of his own riddles, and should he get it wrong, he would make Simon push the launch trigger without him knowing which direction it would shoot. Ultimately, Simon gets his demise, and the last line said in the movie as McClane walks away would be, "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker." This is the preferred ending of writer Jonathan Hensley, but the studio felt it was pretty dark to see McClane so cold and brutal. Hensley had intended that the events of that day and its consequences would have messed with John's mind so much that he becomes unhinged. The studio opted for a more traditional action finale, and we now have an ending that implies a happier ending for John and company. Die Hard with a Vengeance is often considered the best sequel in the series. While the others can offer more in the department of frenetic action and grand spectacle, John McTiernan's involvement shows that the main reason the action works best in his entries isn't because the sequences are trying to top the last, it's the steady ratcheting up of tension involving characters that we're rooting for. Certain situations that good suspense movies can have the viewer ask themselves, what would I do in this situation? And then crescendoing into a ballet of explosions and bullets as the suspense decompresses. They even find a way to include a sequence with John and Zeus sneaking around a tanker occupied by bad guys should you get nostalgic for the traditional Die Hard hallmarks. And Willis just slips comfortably right back into the role that made him a movie star. Die Hard at its core is about the battle of wits between John McClane and the bad guys. He's always in over his head, but he has an immense talent for problem solving. He's a normal guy when compared to Stallone and Schwarzenegger's characters, not only because of a more realistic physique, but he's flawed. He's vulnerable. He gets scared. He's not one to mow down bad guys with ease. He doesn't want to be the hero, but he just wants to do right when the chips are down, like a good old cowboy.
Yippee-ki-yay,